Hey everybody, welcome back. Uh, I've been doing some thinking lately and browsing, out of boredom. And I wanted to find something that covered optics. And there really wasn't anything that I liked, so to speak. Really wasn't a whole lot on terms or in terms of red dots and pros and cons unless it was strictly pistol red dots. So I figured I'd start a optic series where I'm going to talk about the different types of the optics, what the pros and cons are, and where I feel my personal opinion on where these optics fit and what roles they fit. And this is strictly based on looking through the lens of a civilian in terms of using these for maybe home defense or a life and liberty kind of scenario, an SHTF, a Red Dawn, whatever you want to throw out there in terms of possibility. But I am strictly coming from the sense of a prepared civilian. Should anything go down and I need to rely on this, where do these optics fit, and what do they offer, the pros and cons? So, with that being said, we are going to start with red dots. Now, red dots have three different subgenres, if you want to refer to it like that, that encompass the red dot sphere. So you have reflex type red dots, which use an LED that emits a light that is reflected off of a lens, typically the objective lens, and reflected back to your eye. You have holographic sights, which essentially is a reticle that reticle is projected as a hologram using a laser diode. And then the lesser known or lesser utilized is the non-magnified, or technically they're all magnified because of their inherent design, but 1x prismatic sights. So I have a couple different options here. I do have a prism, but this one has a 2.5x magnification range, so I'm not going to use it, but this is an older style prismatic sight. Most of the prismatics that are 1x's, if not all of them that I know of, are going to be compact, like micro size, about as big as this guy here. So you have reflex, holographic, prismatic. Now the prismatic, because I didn't touch on it, utilizes a prism or a set of prisms within the body with an etched reticle, to put it simply. So, what are the pros and cons? So, speaking in generalities, and I'll touch on whatever I need to touch on. First off, they're going to be lightweight, your most lightweight option. So in terms of red dots, we have different types of red dots, specifically the reflex. So in terms of reflex red dots, you're going to have multiple different sizes. You got larger ones like this, which is an Aimpoint Pro, and shorter ones or micro ones like this, which is a 6-hour Romeo 7S. It's basically a carbon copy of the Aimpoint Comp M5. But generally, they're going to be lightweight. And in the case of both of these, you're looking at 7.2 ounces for the Aimpoint, which is very good weight, and then 7.7 ounces for the micro, which you would assume that it's going to be a little bit less than the larger the larger variant of red dot, but the mounts and the way they use the batteries and stuff like that, that all plays into effect when it comes to the overall weight. But we're all around 7.5 ounces or less for these reflex type red dots. Now, you have holographics, tend to be heavier. I'm not entirely sure if that has to do with the technology and how that laser and the reticle is set up in the glass inside, or if it's a matter of making the body a certain way to add to its reliability and robust nature. But they tend to be heavier. For instance, this one is not much bigger than this 6-hour Romeo 7S in terms of footprint, but it's 11.2 ounces. So it's still lightweight, but it's definitely heavier than the other two. But it's going to be lightweight, and as I already mentioned, it's going to offer the smallest footprint for the most part. It's going to, obviously this one is on the larger side because it's a older variant of red dot. But as we've progressed with technology, they've gotten smaller. So they're going to have the smallest footprint, and they're going to be the lightest weight. They're also going to be very robust. There's arguments to be made on whether they are more or less robust than, say, prisms. My personal opinion, I don't think they're going to be as robust as prisms because of the electronics and that being a failure point, as opposed to the prisms within the optic body. But they are very, very robust, and they are combat proven over decades of combat. So they are robust, very robust. Now, they are very intuitive, so simplistic in its use. You essentially, once it's zeroed, you essentially keep both eyes open, you lift that optic into your line of sight and superimpose that dot on the target or potential target that you are focusing on. So it's very simple, straightforward. It's not much of a learning curve to it. There are some that have different reticles, like this EXPS2-0. You can use the bottom of this 68 MOA ring, I believe it's 68 or 65 MOA ring. The bottom you can use in very tight quarters, I think 7 yards and in, as your holdover for your impact, your point of aim, and your POI, your point of impact. But in total, they are very simplistic in their nature. They are very fast because of how there is no magnification. There's no real concern to have a really good head position behind the optic. So long as you're within that window and that reticle isn't hitting the outer edges of that window, you're pretty much going to be on target. Now, there is some parallax shift. A lot of companies will state that there is no parallax shift with red dots. There's definitely parallax shift with red dots. The holographics, not as much, but both of them are extremely minimal. So as long as you're within that window, I want to say 2/3 of that window, you're going to be pretty on point. Where else? What else do we got? They provide incredible battery life, at least in terms of the Reflex red dots and even the Prismatic 1Xs. These two here, for instance, this one gets 30,000 hours of battery life off of a tiny button battery that's like impossible to find. And then this guy gets about 50,000 hours with a AAA battery. I'm not entirely sure if that's with the motion activated technology within the optic or that's without it, but Reflex red dots are going to get extremely long battery life, about 5 years at 50,000 hours, approximately 5 years. Some of them will extend that with that motion activated technology, so very good in terms of battery life. The Prismatics get great battery life, the 1X do. Most of those guys are getting at least 25,000 hours or more, up to 50,000 hours of battery life if it has motion activated technology incorporated into that prismatic optic. But 1X prismatics do get very good battery life. And then these guys, the holographics, suffer drastically with illumination life because of the technology and how it's implemented. These will typically get about 1,000 hours of battery life. There is a tell if your battery's about to die, the reticle will start blinking. But once that happens, you really have between 2.5 and 5 hours of use, depending on your setting. So this one, for instance, gets 1,000 hours of battery life on setting 12. Severely neutered in terms of battery life compared to its counterparts. But overall, really good battery life on the prismatics and the red dots. Now, these are pretty much your only ideal option for night vision use, primarily passive aiming. In terms of passive aiming, you're looking through the night vision optic that you have attached to you, and then through the optic like you would without any type of night vision during the day. You're shooting the same exact way, except you're using the night vision to look through the optic. Holographics really shine in this area because the size of the window and the fact that there's no need for all these coatings because it's a holographic image, not a reflected image. You don't have to worry about light transparency and being able to look through that optic without any type of issue. Whereas some of these red dots, especially the lower end red dots, they do have night vision capability, but like on the micros, the smaller window can create a bit of an issue looking through, as well as being lower end, you don't have as good of coatings on the glass, so that can cause some light transparency as you look through the optic. So if you're big on night vision use and passive aiming, these red dots are going to be your realm and pretty much your only real option. All right, so cons. Here are the cons for red dots, and this is going to be primarily the Reflex and the holographics. You are solely dependent on electronics. Now, these electronics are pretty damn robust, but they're still electronics and they can fail, and that's something to take into consideration when you're choosing your optic. They run off of batteries. Now, there are variants out there that run off of solar panels that are built on top of the optic, but those are more of a redundancy. They don't actually charge your battery. Some of them will work solely off of the solar panel when you're out in, a lightly lit or brightly lit area, but that can introduce an additional failure point, maybe some water intrusion, depending on the quality of the build. For most of those, while they seem great in theory, a lot of it is more gimmicky, so I don't typically recommend one with a solar panel, but there are options out there, and there are some that do it very well. I think HoloSun has a couple that do very well, so there's some to consider. I think SIG also has one that does really well in terms of its use, but the electronics can fail, the batteries can fail, and the batteries are going to fail more often than anything else. And this is where battery type comes into effect. So, for instance, this guy right here runs off of a AAA battery. Common in every household. You can find them in the vast majority of electronics within a household. There's other variants that run off of AA's. EOTech has I believe the Comp M4 runs off of AA's. Common in every household. You can find them in remote controls, in the electronics. They're pretty much everywhere. Where you're going to start running into problems is if you have an optic like this that runs off a CR123A. Those are not very common, especially for people who are not like gun advocates or own firearms that have items that run off of it. You're going to have a hard time finding it in a time where you won't have any type of logistical system set up for resupply and stuff like that. So whatever you have on you is what you have, and if you expend your resources or you just don't have additional resources for backup, finding those additional resources are going to be pretty hard. CR123As and CR2032 button batteries, those are going to be hard to find. Now the CR2032As or the CR2032s, those are actually becoming a little bit more popular, and you can find them even in Dollar Trees. I buy them in Dollar Tree all the time. So they're available a lot more than, say, the CR123A. Where you're really going to have a problem is something like this. that runs off of a 1/3 N or LR44 or one of those weird battery types, like some of the Holosuns run off of like 2016s or something like that, those are going to be an issue to find. So batteries, you have to take into consideration that batteries can fail. They have failed me after only a week or two of use, and they were brand new energizers. So there's things to take into consideration. Mounts can fail. They can be a failure point. Cross bolts, if they're not made of good material, they can break under stress very easily. Also, if you start getting into some of these lightweight mounts, you're obviously taking material away, and if the design isn't there to support it, they can collapse or break under a pretty good hit. So, or most likely they're going to bend or crack. So that's something to consider. And lastly, your vision. So when it comes to the Reflex and the holographics, if you have an astigmatism, this is going to affect how you use this optic or if it's even usable for you. There are people who have such bad astigmatisms that they cannot use it because the starburst so bad that it actually will hurt their eyes to try to look at, because it distorts that image so bad that it makes that optic unusable. This is where Prismatic 1X optics come into play, because you have an etched reticle, and even though they have illumination, that illumination is only, it's retained within that reticle, so there's no real blooming or anything like that, as opposed to a red dot, or like with the holographic, you get kind of like a image in smoke where it gets all pixelated and wavy. That can also cause an issue, and it messes with some people's eyes. All right, so that is the pros and cons as far as where these live from a purely civilian standpoint, in terms of using it like SHTF, life and liberty, you know, whatever. I say these live about 100 yards and in. And the reason I say that is because one of the cons that I forgot to touch on is that they provide zero magnification, which limits your ability to positively identify targets at any extended range. And for me, I can say that I believe comfortably most people will be able to positively identify a potential threat, giving the light, depending on the lighting condition, out to about 100 yards. Maybe a little bit past that, depending on your eyesight. But most people, I think, are going to be 100 yards and in. And this is why I think that red dots are, for a civilian standpoint, where you're going to be in a situation, most likely, if this was to ever happen, that there's just going to be pockets of fighting throughout, looting, stuff like that. And there's not going to be a whole lot of actual threats that you have to engage. So being able to positively identify what is a threat and be able to accurately engage that target is paramount from a civilian perspective. And I have to emphasize a civilian perspective, not military or law enforcement. We have to be accountable for every round sent down range. So this is why I preface this the way that I do. So red dots are awesome. I obviously have a couple of them. I have a couple more. I have some prisms that they're magnified, but not the 1X. I would love to get my hands on a magnified prism 1X, and I really do love these red dots. I primarily use them for like home defense types of situations, or maybe a truck gun that you're running back to your vehicle to grab this vehicle to grab the rifle to engage a known threat. That's different. But in those terms, I think that's 100 yards and in. Now, you can alleviate some of that by the addition of a magnifier, and we'll talk about magnifiers in the next video. So let me know what your thoughts are down below. If I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'd like to have that conversation. This is strictly coming from my opinion, based off of my usage, my training, and how I perceive a potential conflict in this country happening. So, yeah, comment down below. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks.